Canada is unique in terms of a Western democracy. We're the only country in the world that has a legal process for a province to become independent. Other countries don't have this mechanism. Maybe it's the Canadian way. I don't know.
So it's not treasonous?
No, it's not treasonous at all.
As some premiers have stated.
Yes,
there is a legal mechanism.
The Supreme Court of Canada said in the 1998 Quebec reference case that if a clear majority of voters of a province vote on a clear question to become independent, that then creates a legal obligation on part of the federal government, the other provinces, and the impacted First Nations to enter into good faith negotiations.
Hey, well, welcome back, everybody, to the Citizen Podcast. I'm your host, David Craig. It's great to be with you guys. Excited for today's program. It is in the immediate aftermath of something that happened in Calgary, which there is definitely a lot of chatter about. And I think it's something that a lot of Albertans have been looking forward to. Potentially, people in Ottawa haven't really been looking forward to it. But what happened in Calgary, if you're unaware, there was a serious public debate about whether Alberta should remain a part of Canada between Keith Wilson and Jason Kenny, and each of them arguing one side. And what I want to highlight going into it, wasn't just Fringe yelling, it wasn't Twitter back and forths. It was serious debate and conversation about the pros and cons of each one of their stances. And former Alberta Premier Jason Kenny, as he took the stage with Keith Wilson, one of the leading voices in the Alberta independence movement, I think what unfolded was very revealing. And I think we need more of those conversations in Canada politically, because that's actually what helps the citizens. That's what helps you and I to be informed so we can make good, educated decisions, not just running or ranting on emotion or outrage, but conversations based on fact, conversations based, of course, opinions in there, but opinion formed by thought, by study, and answering the questions that you and I have. So today's episode, wherever you may stand on this issue, I don't care if you're in Alberta or if you're in Newfoundland and Labrador, and maybe you have no idea, as I've been in Eastern Canada quite a bit. A lot of people just aren't really, they're just coming to terms with that this is a thing that's actually happening in Western Canada. Wherever you may stand on the issue, you're going to learn something today. I got a lot of questions. At times you'll find me asking questions that I'm curious about. Sometimes I'll be playing devil's advocate. So it's going to be a good conversation. Mr. Keith Wilson, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you.
Thanks for having me here.
So we're in the immediate aftermath. You are a tenured constitutional lawyer. You're also a strong advocate for Alberta independence, as was on display last night as you were debating former Premier of Alberta, Jason Kenny. I would love to know just your immediate what's your immediate thoughts after the debate? Did you win? Did he win? Did he bring some valid points that made you think? Just general synopsis. How did the evening go for you?
Well, I mean, when you're in these types of battles, you always think of the things you could have done better or different. But the most significant takeaway for me from the debate was former Premier Kenny was clear that he agrees that there are things that are happening to Alberta that are caused by Ottawa. They're bad. Mm-hmm. You know, that Ottawa has been holding back the Alberta economy, that he gave a number of instances where the federal government has been overstepping its bounds into provincial jurisdiction, and that's resulted in his government and the Smith government bringing legal challenges. Talked about the sensitivity and the concern about the amount of money that Albertans send to Ottawa and under equalization and the need to address that. And there were several other things that he acknowledged are concerns that he also has. But what was completely missing, and I pointed this out many times in the debate, was that those, like former Premier Kenny, who realized that in many respects Alberta is getting a bad deal from Ottawa, they offered no plan for how to address those concerns. They offered no plan for how to get Ottawa's attention, how to get Ottawa to pick up the phone and be responsive to the concerns that he and I agree exist.
So I did not attend the event last night, so everybody knows. But I was able to read the transcript of the event. So it's like I attended. I actually got to study it maybe a little bit more as opposed to just hearing the words. And Kenny was making some arguments, just to get right into it, that Alberta is getting momentum in terms of working federally with Ottawa. There's some certain things that he would probably throw in the MOU and other things like that. What would your response be to something like that, or what was your response when he says, why would you disrupt? Like, we are moving in the right direction. We are starting to walk forward. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, a lot of the comments from the politicians present and past, in my view, are overstating the progress. And for example, the MOU regarding a pipeline to Tidewater. But one of the things that I pointed out, and I want to emphasize right now, is we here in Alberta have the third largest reserve of oil and gas in the world. Mm-hmm. Any other country that's in any way similar to Alberta and even has a far lesser reserve of oil, but a far higher population and a non-diversified economy, has no income taxes. Mm-hmm. Like, what's going on here? Why is it Alberta that has the third largest reserve of oil and a very diversified economy? Why are we not more prosperous? But using the MOU as an example, the point I make is, look at how much political capital Premier Smith has had to spend, how much effort, how many meetings, how much pleading, just to get permission from Ottawa to make more of our oil and gas available to the world. And that's not a valueless proposition from a moral and political perspective. Mm-hmm. Other countries around the world have come to Canada, have come to Alberta and said, we want more of your oil and gas, because they didn't want to be beholden to Iran, and they didn't want to be supplied by Russia. And through the 11 years of the Liberal government in Ottawa, we have not been able to supply those countries. We have been held back. So my answer to the Premier, or the former Premier, is I don't think we're making the improvements that he describes. I think they're being grossly overstated, but they reflect the fundamental problem that's wrong with Canada and Alberta's place in it. Mm-hmm. Why should we always have to go to Ottawa on bent knee, and put our hands out and say, may we work a little harder, sir, so we may give you more? And then they say, well, maybe, and here's all the conditions. It's I think if someone from afar came and looked at the situation in Alberta and Alberta's power, its economic powerhouse, our diversified economy, our agriculture industry, our oil and gas, we have the youngest entrepreneurial population in the country, right? Would say, why are you always asking this Ottawa place for permission? And why are they always imposing things on you? They'd probably look at us like, what are you doing?
There's just by looking online, there's plenty of videos already out about reviewing the debate. We're going to go through some of the nuances. I do want to press you on a couple of the things that you asserted about. You talk about $80 billion. We'll get to these, just to reference $80 billion in debt servicing, immigration, capital flight, that kind of stuff. First Nations concern. You guys talked a lot about that. My summary of what former Premier Jason Kenny's response was largely, it's just uncertainty and risk is why we shouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. That's really, if I had to summarize it and boil it down to one sentence or one thought, that is what I thought. It wasn't very compelling for me. And just for the record, I've stated this before, of where I'm at. I would still call myself undecided, but I'm up for an adventure. And I 100% see all of the reasons why Alberta is not in the place that it could be, and obviously the imbalance of power between federal and provincial in Canada that obviously was not originally intended when this happened. So I'm in there, but I'm still wanting to be convinced fully, and I think a lot of people aren't where I'm at because I'm usually pretty open. But the people who are really reserved, what I want to get to today, my point in saying all that, what I want to get to today is address what Jason Kenny was stating as risk and uncertainty. And I want to get into some of that to help people understand, what does it mean if I am voting yes in the referendum? Does it mean I'm leaving Canada right away? So we'll get to that, but right off the hop, post the debate last night, Jason Kenny talking about risk and uncertainty. What would initially you say to people who are understanding there is an imbalance? There are issues that are systemic that don't seem to being resolved here in Canada between Ottawa and Alberta, but they're afraid of the unknown. They're afraid of what's going to happen? How do we handle currency? How do we handle banking? How do you handle military, etc.? There's a plethora of things we can go through. When it comes to that, what are your thoughts initially? And then we can kind of dive into the weeds of each one, because I will hope we can answer some of those questions.
In the last 50 years, 41 new countries have come into existence.
Well, can you say that again?
In the last 50 years, 41 new countries have come into existence.
Okay.
In other words, we're not the first person to do this. Mm-hmm. We are not Elon Musk trying to make the first human space flight to Mars. Okay. Number two, the functions that Alberta would need to take over from the federal government, the few that there are, because there's not as many as people might naturally assume, because most of the things that affect your daily life and your friends, your family, and your kids are actually services and programs and laws delivered by the province and the municipalities. Mm-hmm. So all of the things that Alberta would need to take over from the federal government are known and are being delivered today. Okay? So we actually have very, very few unknowns.
What do you mean by being delivered today? What do you mean by that?
So Alberta will need to issue passports.
Yes.
We have 2 passport offices issuing passports.
Okay.
What would change is the logo.
Sure. Okay.
And the words instead of saying
so you're saying the systems are already there for the most part? Is that
100% they are. Okay. Yeah, because there's no everything that Alberta would need to take over is currently being delivered by the federal government. So, Alberta would need to have its own military, but I don't think we need a 1 million-man army. It'd probably be special forces and some civil defense elements. But we have the know-how available to us to build that. This is not novel. Immigration. The federal government has an immigration policy that many are not happy about and think it's causing problems because we're not managing immigration. We're letting more people in than we have schools and hospitals to service the new immigrants. In fact, former Premier Jason Kenny, when he was the Minister of Immigration in the Harper government, which was viewed broadly as a excellent immigration policy.
That's right. Yep.
So there would be nothing to prevent Alberta from recreating that. So when you look at all of the various functions that Alberta would need to take over from the federal government, they're all being delivered today. It's a matter of transitioning. I'll give you just one last practical example. Right now we have border guards at the 2 international airports and at the border crossings into Montana. Those jobs would continue.
Yep.
You would, just like when one company buys out another company and all the staff find out they're no longer working for this oil field service company, they're now working for that one. They get new business cards, and instead of their check being, deposited into their bank account, the deposit entry changes. So Alberta would be able to transition the border guards from being paid by the federal government. In time would change their uniforms from a Canadian flag to an Alberta flag.
Okay.
In other words, this is not, when you sit back and think about it clear-eyed and calmly, it's like, okay, so we have these functions being provided by the federal government. They're doing it this way. Alberta would need to take them over. I think the real question is, will Alberta be able to run a passport office better than the federal government? And I think we would be able to.
Interesting. Sorry, my brain's just thinking of what direction do I want to go.
But I want to stay on this fear thing, though, if I could.
Let's keep going. Yep.
Yeah, because one of the things that motivates me, why am I doing this? I'm a busy, successful lawyer, but I'm also a dad. And I look at the direction of the country. I look at the future in store for my kids and grandkids, and I get very concerned. And in fact, I get scared.
Sure.
And I get scared because I look at the unsustainable spending. We know that the Trudeau and Carney governments have accumulated more taxpayer debt than every other government in the history of the country combined.
Well, Trudeau, I think, held that title alone.
He did.
Before
That's true.
Prime Minister Carney came. And is Carney continuing down the same path?
He's accelerating it. And he was advising Trudeau.
That's right.
So, and just to stay there, because we're in a long format. I really want to be careful about this because we all need to think about this. Well, what does that mean? Is that just some mumbo jumbo fiscal hawk economist stuff? No. What that means is inflation goes up, right? So, and we've all seen the effects of that. When I go to the grocery store and I see people with barely anything in their carts, and they have that same expression on their face looking at that jar of pickles or that bottle of syrup that you would have when you're a guy in your 20s going into a new car dealership. Someday I'm going to be able to afford that new pickup truck. Someday I'm going to be able to afford that jar of pickles. It's just terrible what's happened. So the cost of living means you and I keep working as hard as we are now, but then we have less money to spend because it becomes worth less.
Yeah, it's
right?
the buying power.
And we've seen the inflation. If you have a chance to travel to other countries and go to buy a bottle of water and realize here you're paying $4 for it at a gas station or whatever, and in other countries for that same bottle of water you're paying 89 cents. And I remember when a bottle of water was 89 cents. So I'm concerned about that. But I'm also, the debt servicing costs that they're projecting. The budget office, parliamentary budgetarian, whatever his name is, I got that wrong, but you know what I mean.
Yep.
He said that the trajectory is unsustainable. So it's going to become...
Explain the debt servicing cost. What does that mean? Because I think you stated $80 billion annually. Was that annually?
Yeah,
or is that...
they're projecting, and I can't remember the year, but it's in a few years from now, it will cost $80 billion a year just to service the debt. That's like the interest on your mortgage.
It's not paying down your debt.
Not paying down. That's just the interest component on your mortgage payment or the interest component on your credit card.
And that comes out of our pockets as citizens in
That's
Canada.
right. And so that's one aspect of it. So economically, and
that's the question. Sorry to interrupt. I know you're on a train of thought, but
That's okay.
I want to camp there because I think we become so desensitized.
We have.
As citizens to big numbers. You look at the States and the trillions of debt that's going on there. I think it's 1.2 trillion. And you look at Canada and how much. Sorry, does Canada have? Do you know what our current debt is?
No.
It's high. Anyways,
for my mental health, I try not to remember that number.
But my point is that we become so debt desensitized to giant numbers. But what does that mean for the actual person on the ground? It's like, sure, we owe this much, but how does that affect John who lives downtown Calgary, right? Or someone across in Saskatchewan, wherever that might be. What does it mean for the average citizen who cares about their kids, cares about going to soccer, putting food on the table, just trying to have a decent
life? It means
that
maybe they're not going to be able to afford soccer for their kids. It means that new vehicle that they really need to get to work reliably, they can't afford to buy, and they have to just suck it up with the old one. It means that when they feel they've worked really hard and would like to take their spouse out for a nice dinner, they can't, right?
And you extrapolate that long term, it means you look like Venezuela or you look like
that's
Haiti
the trajectory
or something
we're
like
on.
that, where it costs $1 million of their currency to get the most basic thing because you got zero buying power and it's worthless essentially. That's way down the road.
It's way down the road, but we're not on a good trajectory.
Sure.
And now so it's the and look at the statistics on younger people not buying homes because they can't afford it.
Yep.
And here's the one that really touches people who are sort of older than 50 is younger people are not having children like they used to because they feel they can't afford it. And that's not a sign of a healthy society when that happens. So that scares me. But then there's the whole nother aspect of this. Under the governance of Ottawa, we see this trend towards authoritarianism. And what I mean by that is we have all these censorship laws that are now passed and soon to be implemented. These restrictions on streaming services. We've seen on Facebook and other things, you're not allowed to look at that, the news services and so on. So, and other policies of the government signal an ongoing trend towards authoritarianism that I find very concerning because I think freedom is very important, obviously. So when I look at the direction that Canada's moving, and then one last piece, the mismanagement and the ideological decision making. The world needs our energy. We could, even forgetting about Alberta, the government in Ottawa could significantly reduce the deficit, could cause significant economic growth. We have some of the worst economic growth in the G20.
That's right.
Where our productivity is plummeting. Confidence in investment is a disaster. Royal Bank of Canada did analysis a month ago that over $1 trillion in investment left Canada. Our job creators, Canadian Federation of Independent Business, I think it was, did a study. People, high worth earners who create companies that create jobs are leaving Canada at an unprecedented rate. That scares me for the future of the next generation. This is something that I think people should be fearful of. And it's a result of deliberate policies where the Carney Liberals have said it's more important to promote, net zero green things than it is to unleash the power of our economy, to unleash the power of our natural resources and make them available to the world and create the jobs. They've put barriers in place. The No More Pipelines law is not just restricted to pipelines. I've in my legal practice, I've been involved in these regulatory approval processes, mostly representing landowners that are concerned about impacts of projects on their property rights. And what the federal government did through Bill C-69 is made the Impact Assessment Act so unmanageable that companies just said, we're not even going to try.
When you mentioned Bill C-69, for me, that seems like a logical first step if the federal government was wanting to make amends or to show real steps forward in helping Alberta receive what it wants to receive as more, and Premier Smith has put, as a more independent Alberta than Canada. Obviously, there's people who want to be fully independent, but that seems like a logical first step. Repeal Bill C-69 to show that you're serious. I want to get back to, we're seeing a major clash of ideas right now because in Ottawa, and this idea, and this is really Canada, when you look at this idea of selling stability and safety, good governance as a part of our slogan, or what our government is. Trust the system, stay the course. It's kind of what former Premier Kenny was stating. It's kind of trust the system, what we're doing. On the other side in Alberta, especially the people who have been signing the petitions and all of that, there is this growing belief of self-determination that's coming through. And I think that's the clash of ideas that we're seeing in Canada. And you've talked a lot about the regional divide, the size of Canada being unmanageable under the current governing system. So we have what Premier Smith has stated, a referendum coming up. And she's going to add the question. Maybe we should touch on this real quick. Where are we in terms of the referendum question? Because there's one that's tied up in court. I think that was put forward by, not the Alberta Prosperity Project. What was the other group that was?
Stay Free Alberta.
Stay Free Alberta, thank you. But that's tied up in courts still, I believe, and might be tied up for a long time. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, let me just sort of go back to a basic thing that most people don't understand or maybe just haven't put their mind to.
Sure.
Which is, Canada is unique in terms of a Western democracy in that we're the only country in the world that has within their our constitutional framework a legal process for a province to become independent. Other countries don't have this mechanism. Maybe it's the Canadian way. I don't know.
So it's not treasonous?
No, it's not treasonous at all.
Some premiers have stated.
Yes.
There is a legal mechanism for it.
Yes. And so the Supreme Court of Canada said in the 1998 Quebec reference case that if a clear majority of the voters of a province vote on a clear question to become independent, that then creates a legal obligation on part of the federal government, the other provinces, and the impacted First Nations to enter into good faith negotiations as to how that province will transfer from provincehood into statehood and become a country. So that's a very unique thing that within Canada, any province has the right to seek independence and achieve it. So in Alberta, we have an additional layer created by the Alberta government, which is citizens can come together and petition government to hold a referendum on a topic, including independence. And we've had 2 attempts at that petition, both of which have gotten bogged down and tied up in the courts. Mm-hmm. So there's still no dispute that this legal pathway exists. What the courts have done is created confusion as to whether or not it can be initiated by citizens as opposed to the provincial government.
Conrad Black had a great article, I believe last week, about this court that he called it a non-serious court. He says when it gets to any serious court, it will be shot down. Or when it gets appealed to a serious court, it will go through. It won't be an issue. That was his opinion he wrote maybe last week. So with it being caught up, and I've heard some speculation that it could be years of it being caught up in court, is that why do you think Premier Smith announced what she announced last week regarding adding this question, a new question to the referendum, to have a referendum? Obviously, she was kind of widely criticized about we're going to ask a question to ask a question type of thing. What was your take on that, and does that actually help this movement move forward?
Yes, it does. And I think the Premier was put in a difficult spot.
She definitely has been for a while.
Yeah, that's for sure.
No doubt about that.
But in sort of focusing in on this particular issue, the situation was that if she would have issued an announcement that the referendum question on October 19th was going to be up, down, stay, leave, that the First Nations chiefs, and it's not all of them, it's not the First Nations people themselves, it's a few chiefs have brought these legal challenges, and that they would bring a legal challenge against that. So it would put the whole question of Alberta's future, whether Alberta's going to stay in Canada, whether Alberta's going to negotiate a new deal, effectively on ice. Mm-hmm. So by formulating the question the way she decided to do it, what I realized upon reflection and looking at it and analyzing it is she took it out of the purview of the court because it's a question about a question. So it will allow the dialogue to continue.
Interesting.
It'll allow Albertans to continue to reflect on their options. It'll allow her to continue to say to Ottawa, look, we've got serious trouble here. You're giving us a bad deal. We're an incredible contributor financially to the country and in many other respects. Address our concerns.
Yeah.
So I like it.
Okay. So people might be wondering whether they're going to vote yay or nay to that question. People who are unsure of what the future is going to look like, if they vote in favor, yes, does that mean Alberta's immediately leaving, or what does that do? And for people who maybe aren't sure if they want to leave Canada, why should they still vote yes if they want to see Alberta in a stronger position?
Yeah, so, the question on its face without knowing the answer choices seems odd, because it's like me saying to you, would you like coffee or tea? And you say yes. Right?
Fair
or
enough.
Then you say no. And I'm like, which one is it?
Okay.
So the way the question is formulated is, do you want to stay in Alberta stay in Canada rather? Do you want to stay in Canada? Or do you want the Alberta government to commence the formal process to hold an independence referendum? And so your answer choices are going to be something like A, stay in Canada, B, commence independence referendum process. So what this will do is a couple of things. It allows those of us who believe that Alberta will be incredibly prosperous and successful as an independent country to inform those who either aren't convinced of that or not even thinking about it to hopefully vote yes, and build the support necessary so that when the second vote comes, that we'll be successful in having a clear majority. So that's sort of the pathway. That's the choice.
It might be a good time to talk about Alberta's next step, because there's a lot of, from conversations I've had, and I'm asking everywhere I go, whether I'm sitting out at restaurants or I come across random people, I just love knowing, what do you think of this? Are you paying attention to it and not? Obviously, as to refer to former Premier Kenny again, with the uncertainty and the risk involved with that, which I still will get to down the road. when it comes to people voting to walk out this process, a lot of them want to know details of what does life look like, what's the how. We touched on a little bit as you were kind of talking about some of the frameworks. Talk to us about Alberta's next step, what you're doing with that, and how that actually will bring a formation to answer a lot of questions of the hows for a lot of the areas there's maybe big uncertainty.
Sure. So, one of the things I've given a lot of thought to is how can I help Albertans in their decision making? Mm-hmm. And I'm a student of Alberta history and Canadian history. I've worked in government. I've dealt with complex cases. And I understand, how government processes and legal processes work. So I've recently started a group called the Alberta Transition Council. And the purpose of that group, and it's active now, is to bring together subject matter experts in areas of telecommunication, aviation, monetary policy, banking, military, to prepare a white paper, a document that will detail, if it's the case that Albertans vote for independence, how will that transition occur? How will we ensure continuity of service? How will we ensure the issuance of passports? How we ensure the continuity of aviation services so people can still fly and other aircraft can still fly through our airspace. So that's the Alberta Transition Council.
Okay.
We're working on the white paper. It will answer questions, fair and proper and legitimate questions that people have. If you're a tradesman, is my trade certification going to still be recognized in another province if I want to pull cards, right? And we're hoping to have that white paper completed in July, and we'll make it available publicly through various, normal communications means. Okay. But that's only one part of the problem in terms of getting to the goal. You'll be aware that the Forever Canada has an organized group. They have a campaign office. They have signs. They have a website. There's a couple of other groups that have recently formed by former politicians, including former Premier Kenny, to promote staying in Canada and making the case for that and campaigning on it using traditional campaign techniques and door knocking and campaign materials. Mm-hmm. So I'm now starting a second group that's focused on the campaign side, and that's called Alberta's Next Step. Okay. So it's Alberta's next step to independence. It's Alberta's next step to getting control over our future. It's Alberta's next step to unleashing the power of our economy. And this group will focus on more traditional campaign information sharing, helping organize the thousands of volunteers that we saw out in the cold collecting signatures for Stay Free Alberta. So two-pronged approach. One is sort of, I joke, it's the white paper and the Alberta Transition Council is old smart people doing the boring stuff, the heavy lift, and building that document and that knowledge so as to how the transition will occur, to reassure people, actually, they don't need to be fearful of this. Okay. And then the campaign side is more to answer the questions, to get the excitement, to get the awareness, because we really do have a tremendous opportunity to build an incredible country, given our diversity of our economy, our agricultural land, our natural resources, our oil and gas. Alberta has the youngest population by workforce in the country.
It definitely comes down to fear of the unknown for a lot of people. Sure. And what you're essentially asserting is you're going to help reveal the curtain that's blocking the unknown for a lot of people. And I think at the very least, it's going to help educate a ton of people, hopefully bring some fear away as we are walking through this, because this is going to continue to grow. And you mentioned July. You expect by July the white paper, so you still got several months before October comes around. Amazing. Can you tell us who the we is? You said we a lot for the Alberta's Next Step. Others that are involved?
Well, there's no shortage of people who want to continue to be active. Okay. And what's been lacking is a campaign structure. Sure. That we're going to be building very quickly because those on the stay side are active. and we've got some catching up to do on the independent side.
Yep.
And so that's the vehicle through which I want to help others focus their energies in a very strategic manner.
Got it. Can we use the terms official capacity, unofficial capacity? Because when you look back at Quebec, when they were going through that, the government was driving that. Right now, our government is not driving that, although MSM pundits are calling Premier Smith a separatist government. I don't think she is at all. She's helping respect the citizens and how they're operating. But how do we move from unofficial citizen-led movement to official, where you've actually kind of got a group or a leader that's really running forward? How does that look, and is that even possible? Like, it almost seems like it needs to be spearheaded by someone if it wants to continue to get great momentum. Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I always believe in the wisdom of the crowd.
Okay.
And the wisdom of the crowd, they'll decide who their leaders are. They'll decide which groups or voices they want to get behind.
Okay.
It's not something I worry about. I think we just got to get out there and do it. I'm prepared to lead this particular group.
Yep.
And I know many want to support it. But, let's just talk about this idea and the difference, because Jason Kenny brought this up. You don't need a political party to advocate for a policy outcome. I'm a huge believer in grassroots groups.
Okay.
And let's talk about the mechanics, because it's not intuitive unless you've, been deep into the bowels of government and how they work. So how this would unfold is, if the independent side is successful in convincing a sufficient number of Albertans to vote yes in both referendums, then that would then give a mandate to Premier Smith to build a team to negotiate with Ottawa, the provinces, and the First Nations. She was asked in a press conference last week, the day after she announced the referendum question, as to whether, if the referendums were successful, whether she would resign or advance Alberta to the next step in the the independence process. And her answer was that she would respect the will of the people.
Yeah.
So what I would expect would happen is, aided by the white paper, the Premier would make a proposal to Canada as to, here's the way in which we propose to transition Alberta from a province to a country. Here's, there's 5 national parks. Here's what our appraised value is of them. There's 4 military bases. Here's what they're worth. Here's how much of the Canadian pension plan that Albertans have in the plan. So that's how much you've got to pay back. And lay out, for lack of a better term, basically the terms of the proposed divorce, right? It's minutes of settlement, they call them in family law. So it would say, here's our proposal. And included in that, though, because remember, we're not digging up the borders of Alberta and putting dollies under it and moving it. We're still going to be in the middle of Canada, or at least a part of Western Canada, geographically. So we would have a free trade agreement with the rest of Canada. We'd have a mobility agreement with Canada. This is not about us moving and leaving Canada per se. It's about redefining Albertans' relationship with Canada. We'll still be neighbors, but we won't have Ottawa telling us how to live. If there's a criminal justice problem and we feel the criminal code needs to be amended, we won't have to convince politicians from Newfoundland to Victoria to support it anymore. We won't have to convince the elected officials, the MPs in in Quebec, in Ontario, that effectively decide the fate of the rest of the country. So we'll have the ability to have more direct democracy, in the sense that we'll be electing the people that make those decisions. Right now, Alberta lives by laws created by politicians we don't elect, and that's a math function that won't change no matter what's negotiated, period. We're just, simple math is, it will always be Central Canada telling us how to live our lives. Central Canada either helping us prosper economically or holding us back. And I just don't think we need to do that anymore. We've really outgrown Canada. We can redefine our relationship with Canada. We can still love Canada. We can help Canada. But we're in a position because of our tremendous natural resources, not just oil and gas, but agriculture and other, our diversified economy, our aerospace industries, our young population, our entrepreneurial drive, our sophisticated modern infrastructure. We're not in a situation where we need to constantly going on bent knee to Ottawa and asking for permission and constantly being told what we can't do.
You say simple math, you're assuming, or you're stating basically the population dispersion across Canada. That's the reason why. Population heavy.
Yeah.
Quebec, Ontario controls what we do in the West. That's why you hear a lot of sentiment, the vote's already over before Alberta casts its vote federally.
That's right.
So I don't want to brush over with what you said earlier about Alberta's next step, the white paper, so people can be on standby to be watching for that as that continues to form and you start to get out there more publicly with it. The white paper coming in July, I think that will be highly educational for people to be watching out. So just, you guys got to watch out for that. A lot of great things you said there. There's an assumption, what you just said about negotiating with Canada about the relationship. Now that is under the assumption that Canada wants to negotiate. Is there any reason why they wouldn't? And the reason I'm asking that question, because right now Prime Minister Carney has been flexing quite a bit when it comes to a relationship with our most important trade partner in the world, arguably our most important document when it comes to CUSMA or USMCA, in coming up to this July, re-looking at our trades with the U.S. And there's definitely a lot of posturing going on, and we'll see it how it actually turns out. My point is there a chance that if Carney's still in power once this all goes through with timing, that he's like, well, you know what, we're not going to negotiate with you guys. It's just goodbye, you're on your own type of thing. People will have that fear. I've had people bring that up. What happens if they say that? What does Alberta look like?
I think it's likely.
Okay.
I'm a pessimist in the sense that I don't think the federal government is going to negotiate in good faith as they're legally required to do. And what's interesting and incredibly important is that the Supreme Court of Canada in the 1998 Quebec reference case anticipated that. And in paragraph 195 of that decision, the court acknowledged the possibility that the parties would not enter into good faith negotiations or not succeed with them, and that would not preclude the province from a unilateral declaration of independence. Okay, now what am I talking about there? What's remarkable to me, and I was stunned at the time when it happened, September 2025, last year, Prime Minister Carney announced that the government of Canada was going to recognizing the unilateral declaration of independence of the Palestinian people within the boundaries of the country of Israel.
That's right.
Even though they didn't even have a defined border for this new nation state. So the Prime Minister refreshed this international doctrine, this international concept that people within a region of an existing country can exercise their free will, their right to self-determination, and say, we're declaring ourselves to be a country, and then look to the world, are you going to recognize us? That's what Palestine did, and Canada was very quick to recognize them. The United States of America has already made it clear through statements from various senior cabinet ministers in the Trump administration that if Alberta were to seek independence and seek recognition, that they would recognize us. Now think about this for a minute. Over 90% of Alberta's economy is north-south into the United States. The United States is the largest market in the world, the largest economy in the world. We see leaders from other countries far afield going to the White House on bent knee, bringing trinkets and gifts, trying to get Trump's permission to increase trade into this incredible economy, right? It's right beside us. We border it. It's the shortest shipping distance relative to Korea and Japan. Look at how far they've got to ship their goods when they want to get them into the United States. We just got to drive across the border, right? So what's more important, think about this. Alberta having a healthy economic relationship with the United States that buys 90% of our goods and our resources, or a relationship with Ottawa, right, that doesn't buy virtually anything. Our economy is tied to the United States. If the United States is prepared to recognize Alberta, then we have a very secure and prosperous future in front of us. And those are the facts.
What happens if there's a hostile government in the U.S., according to Canada and Alberta? Like, call it a couple of years go by and Trump is no longer in power. He's no longer president. You have pendulum swings and it goes the other way. How reliant would we have to be on the U.S.? And what would, there's uncertainty there for some people. So thoughts on that?
Well, if you look at what's happening in the United States right now, and I'm a student of U.S. politics, I studied it carefully and follow it closely. One of the biggest determiners of whether or not a president gets elected or the party in power does well during their midterms, which are coming up, is the price of gasoline, right?
Really?
Yes.
I think I knew that, but you just brought that right back up.
Yeah, no, it's a truism, and you know, people can research it.
Yeah.
Well, listen to this statistic. 55% of the imports of oil into the United States come from Alberta. 55%. Could you imagine the impact on the cost and availability of gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, bunker, and all of the other energy products if somehow Alberta wasn't supplying the United States? This is the thing. The more I look at this and the more I think about it, and I'm struggling to convey it with clarity, so I'm going to try right now. We are in a uniquely blessed position as a province. Not only do we have the third largest reserve of oil and gas in the world, we're right connected to and beside the largest economy in the world and the largest consumer and market demand for our product. It just doesn't get better, right? So it won't matter. I do believe that we're at a rare historic confluence of events with the track record of the Liberals in Ottawa causing many Albertans, even those who don't support independence, to be very uncomfortable, to be concerned, and not just monetary and economic policy, but you know, this two-tier justice system, you know, of what's happening, catch and release, the gun grab, all of these different things, the censorship laws are making people...
All of which we've covered on the show in different episodes, by the way. Those
yes,
yeah. So that's not unfamiliar to our audience.
A regular watcher. I love this program.
Oh, thank you.
I'm thrilled to be here in this chair. So we've got that going on. We have the Trump administration. So it's interesting. If you go back and look at the referendums in Quebec, it was Democratic administrations in place, and they signaled right away, Quebec, if you separate, we're not recognizing you.
Yeah.
That's not what's happening here. So we have, and then we look at the global events. So we have the situation, the horrific situation in the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
And we've seen how vulnerable it's made Europe and other countries to low cost or reasonably priced, stable supply of energy.
Yeah.
Then you layer on top of that the war in Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And it just hasn't created an availability and shortage of oil and gas and jet fuel. It's also created a shortage of fertilizer, right? Because a lot of fertilizer comes out through that strait. Well, what's one of the few places in North America that is a serious producer of urea nitrogen fertilizer and a net exporter? Alberta.
Exactly.
Right? So it's not just the oil and gas. The two wars have illustrated we also have other things. There's an acute shortage that is anticipated to have significant ripple effect to AI data centers. Chips won't get to be made because they need helium.
Yeah.
We produce helium and we have tremendous capability to increase it.
Yeah.
Lithium, I could keep going. Again, we are absolutely blessed. The reason we're not producing these things to a world that desperately wants them, is prepared to pay vast sums of money for them to create jobs here and wealth and prosperity, is because Ottawa's fixated on these ideological pursuits, and they've put in deliberate policies to constrain our economy. It's spectacular, but those are the facts. And I'm hoping that at some point, more and more Albertans kind of just have almost like a Gestalt kind of shock moment. Like, wait a minute. We don't actually have to put up with this anymore. We can still have a terrific relationship with Canada. We can still have open borders in terms of movement of people, but we can actually take control of our destiny, make our decisions here. If our politicians start getting reckless with spending like $200 million on a spaceport, which is really a gravel pad, we can unelect them. We cannot unelect anybody in Ottawa, right? So there's there's no accountability.
No doubt the opportunity is there. That's something I'm so convinced of what is in Alberta, the potential that is within us. It is horrendous that we have got the natural resources, the people. We've got all the ingredients. What could be a beautiful Canada's for sure, beautiful Alberta, but there's no excuse to have the economic decline that we have had with basically what we've been doing. You're making a very strong case there. We have about 10, 11 minutes left, and I want to, as rapid fire as we can in a long form conversation. I want to, Jason Kenny, I think a couple of his strongest points, which I would throw a caveat in there. They're not really very strong points, but they're ones that people have questions about. I want to throw them in under the idea of risk and uncertainty and just maybe dispel your thoughts on them. He repeatedly brought things back to capital flight. Investment hates uncertainty. Is that a for sure thing that's going to happen, or is there a case to make that we're not going to have to deal with that if Alberta decides to go?
What a spectacular thing for him to say. $1 trillion in investment have left because of the uncertainty of the policies created by the Trudeau and Carney Liberals. What independence does is bring back investment certainty and confidence. And they bring up, and he did last night, this cartoon version of history. And they say, well, the Bank of Montreal and Sun Life and all these companies fled Quebec to Bay Street in Toronto with their head offices because of independence and referendums in Quebec. That's pure, patent, factual nonsense. Because the first referendum was in 1980. The first head office to leave was in 1977. The second one the other one's in 1978. They left because of Bill 101, which was an extreme French language law that prohibited English in the workplace, signage, businesses. And so these head offices left because they were concerned. They had large English-speaking staff. They didn't want to go through all the requirements of moving everything into French. It wasn't because of the referendum. But wait a minute, even if it were, it's easy to relocate a head office. You cannot relocate the oil sands. You cannot relocate this massive arable land that we have for agriculture and livestock. You cannot relocate these multi-billion-dollar facilities. They're all going to stay. So, and the bigger concern I have is, how do we manage the economic growth when Alberta becomes independent? How do we manage the influx of people that are going to come here because, we're going to be seeking to have less and freer government and lower taxes? How do we manage the scale of investment that's going to come because we're going to finally create an environment of certainty? It's the federal government that's created the uncertainty. The discussion of independence is a prospect for certainty that we can deliver.
Great answer. That's obviously a big concern for business owners and people who are looking to grow in Alberta. Also a good thing to add, and you touched on a little bit, is Canada has had little new outside money coming into it over the last, that's data back. We just don't have a lot of money investment coming into Canada because of that. Okay, next one I want to get to quickly is treaty disputes among First Nations. We're seeing a lot of movement, a lot of political posturing. Nenshi, I was going to say Mayor Nenshi, former Mayor Nenshi of Calgary, is obviously being a big part of that. Is there issues when it comes to treaty rights? How do you handle that?
Well, we need to be eyes wide open on this. So first of all, let's be clear about where the opposition's coming from. and I'm going to be candid at the risk of appearing provocative, because I'm not trying to be provocative, but it's not First Nations people themselves. The most authoritative polling that was done indicates that that there's more First Nations who would support independence than oppose it. And the other thing that's very important to keep in mind is that it's a few chiefs from a few of the First Nations.
Why did Jason Kenny throw out 47 First Nations reject? That's the number he threw out.
Well, he's wrong on that.
Okay.
And I've had First Nations people approach me and say that in their community, their chief is opposing it. And normally for a decision like this, because they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on their lawyers instead of dealing with the issues on their reserve. And a number of First Nations residents have come to me and said, normally for a decision like this, they actually poll us or they have meetings. They made this decision on their own. So I do not believe this characterization that every First Nation in Alberta is against independence is not borne out by a clear-eyed examination of the facts. But in any event, what's remarkable is two things. First of all, there's historical precedent repeated that you can have a fundamental change in the governance of the area where the treaty lands are, and treaty rights will be preserved. The 1850 Robinson Treaty in Northern Ontario, 1850, was with the British government. And then the British government transferred and created a new country called Canada in 1867.
You brought this up. Yeah.
Right? And there was no change. There's an example closer to home. All of the treaties in Alberta, the 3 treaties, were entered into prior to Alberta becoming a province. And Alberta became a province, so the authority and the jurisdiction, the governmental structure for the area of Alberta changed, and the treaties were preserved. However, the federal government maintained control and ownership of all the unoccupied Crown land in Alberta and the oil and gas, okay? The mines and minerals, the natural resources. In 1930, after protests from Alberta, the federal government agreed to transfer control of all the land and the natural resources from the federal government to the province. They put a clause in the agreement, the 1930 Natural Resources Transfer Agreement, that the Alberta government had to agree to honor treaty rights and traditional First Nation rights, including hunting, trapping, fishing, etc. And that's why in Alberta, when I go fishing, I have to get a fishing license. When I go hunting, I have to go get a hunting license. But if I'm First Nations, I don't. And there's the Jay Treaty from the 1700s that allows First Nations to freely travel into the United States. Did you know that? That if you're a First Nations treaty card holder, you show up at the border, you show them your card, and they say, have a safe trip. You don't have to give them a passport or anything. So there's an example. Where I'm getting at is there's no circumstance here where the First Nations' rights are threatened. And that often gets lost. First Nations members have the same right to vote in a referendum as everybody else.
That's right.
One vote. But here's the ultimate kicker to show that this is a red herring. Who gets to sit at the negotiating table when an independence vote is successful? The Supreme Court of Canada laid out 3 groups. The federal government, the other provinces, and affected First Nations. So they have, the Supreme Court of Canada has declared that it's part of our constitutional framework that the First Nations have to be at the table. They got a seat at the table. So I just think this is a distraction. I think it's politics.
We just got 2 minutes left. Something just happening right now on social media in the last 25 minutes where Prime Minister Carney is saying 50% plus 1 is not enough. Alberta's vote only counts if Ottawa says so, essentially. I'm just reading here. And I had a couple people, I posted obviously just on our social media that you're sitting here. And some people are writing that in. What do you think of Carney saying 50% plus 1 doesn't count, but it counts to elect the government, it counts to elect MPs, etc. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, and let's be really clear on this one. Is he saying that to Quebec too? No, he's not.
The double standard is so
right.
Oh my gosh, we should.
But hang on, but let's deal with it. Let me put my pure lawyer's cap on here for you. there's a hierarchy. 1998 Supreme Court of Canada decision, the year 2000, the federal government parliament brings in the Clarity Act. What if there's a conflict between the Clarity Act and the Supreme Court of Canada decision? Supreme Court of Canada decision trumps. The Supreme Court of Canada, and what the Clarity Act was about, was constraining the broad reach and the level playing field that the Supreme Court of Canada gave to provinces. And the federal government was attempting to take back control, so they brought in this Clarity Act. The day they brought the Clarity Act in the year 2000, the Quebec legislature passed, I think might have been called Bill 99, it doesn't matter. They passed a law saying they will not follow the Clarity Act. It's unconstitutional, and Ottawa does not get to tell a province what to do. And they're right at law. There is nothing in the Supreme Court of Canada decision that it authorizes or gives power to the federal parliament to approve or veto the question for its clarity. And there's nothing in the Supreme Court of Canada decision that expands or gives authority to Mr. Carney or his government to decide whether it's a clear majority. It's another example of Ottawa's overreach. Quebec has rejected it. Interesting though, he says one thing to Quebec and another thing to Alberta. It's another example of how Canada's become increasingly dysfunctional. I think we're too large of a country to be efficiently, maximally best governed. We're too regionally diverse economically and culturally.
We're going to wrap right away. That was very well said. I think that's a great point to end on. Just to let you know what a lot of the comments were coming in, because I posed a question saying, ask. A lot of them were comments. There were some questions. We didn't get to all of them. And I posed the question, should Alberta stay or should Alberta go? Most people from different provinces are saying, I'm from Manitoba, you guys should go, and I'm going to move to Alberta. One came from PEI, said the same thing. And so there's some great questions that came through. But I so appreciate your time. I want you to make me a promise, if you don't mind. Probably you want to hear it first. As well, I want to have you back several times between now and October. Whenever you're in Calgary, it'd be great to even like you and I could go for 2 or 3 hours. There's so many things we're not going to get to today because this is such a big, complex issue. But I want to keep helping bring people clarity as we tackle some of these issues. And no doubt there's going to be more things that are going to come up over time. So we'd love to have you back if you'd be willing to join us whenever you're in town. And we'll keep moving. But thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, and I'd welcome that opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you guys for hanging with us today on Citizen. I want you to throw your questions in the comments right now. If there are things that sparked questions or you have uncertainty, next time we have Keith Wilson back on, we'll definitely pose the questions to him. If there's things you full out disagree with, let us know, state your case. Would love to hear why. We're always in the comments, but we appreciate you guys and your support as we continue to try to help citizens be educated to be able to continue to move forward together. We'll see you guys next time. The show goes on.